Sailors/people working at sea, what's the most creepy or most amazing sight you witnessed? In the pitch of the night, in the middle of the vast emptiness of the sea, you see the stars filling the heavens, and more shooting stars than you would expect, streaking to the earth with their fiery tails. As your eye draws down to the water, you find that somehow the ocean is darker and emptier than the sky. Your eyes strain for a glimpse of anything, but ultimately, you only catch glimpses of strange and mysterious creatures, lithely swimming just beneath the surface, occasionally peeking above, or triggering flashes of bioluminescence that disappear as suddenly as they appear. Which brings us to Story 1. Oftentimes in the Navy, I'd stand on the fantail and watch the ocean. Once we had hundreds, probably around 400 dolphins riding the carrier's wake. They followed us for 3 days. In the middle of the Pacific, it's so dark and there's so little light pollution. You can see the reds, browns, and faint blues of gas clouds in the starscape. Another time, I was watching the water at night. They say it draws you in, and it really does. You look at this pitch black void, and only the wake or turbulence of the water catching light, and intrusive thoughts of jumping in just naturally occur. It's mesmerizing, especially if you're alone. At night, during one of these events, I saw blue glowing water, what I now know as bioluminescent algae, and inside this rather massive patch of blue glowing water were squid that appeared to be maybe 15-20 foot long. You could catch their outline by the light from the water. I stared at what was multiple squid passing by for minutes, what seemed like an eternity, and then the light started going away in the spot I was staring. There was still a lot of glowing water. We weren't headed out of it. But this patch gets darker and darker and darker until pitch black. A solid 15 seconds of intense curiosity. Suddenly, a lot of turbulence, and a whale surfaces. It had snatched up all the squid. The whale cocked to one side and looked at the ship, and our eyes met, I want to think. It studied the ship for a moment, until just sinking back down until the glow of the water masked it completely. Story 2. Fresh out of college, I got a job in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or so they said, as an architect designing whatever. Ended up doing oil rigs, and one beautiful morning there were sharks going under the main platform, like always. But there were 2 dead sharks. Next morning, 3 dead. Then 4 the next day. Then a steady 4 or 5 a day for a week or 2. They would float up under the see-through deck that looked much like a metal colander. Crew would have to punch them down so the current could catch them with a large pole. What made it really weird was they looked like they had heart attacks or died in their sleep. No marks or bites or anything. The guys on the rig had all kinds of theories. Then one morning, in a room that was completely submerged and had a beautiful view as we sat in a meeting, everyone got to see the reason the sharks were dying, like viewing it on a movie screen. This octopus had made itself a home between the base and the deck. A shark was swimming by in a cruising fashion, and we see these tentacles grab it right in front of the glass and snap it like a glow stick. The marine biologist smiled and said, "Octopus is literally doing that to entertain themselves. Like, because he can." The marine biologist lowered a dive camera, and this octopus was huge. The crew would joke about it thereafter. People would smoke on the deck at night and would say, "Don't let the octopus in." Seeing those tentacles was just insane for their length. And to think about how a shark is mostly muscle and the octopus would just snap it, it's kind of scary. Story 3. Giant spears plunging in and out of the sea. In the Gulf of Alaska, I've seen some stuff, but one of the most terror-inspiring things I've seen are what can happen with some of the loose logs from the logging trade. Sometimes, when a big log gets loose from a raft, it becomes partially waterlogged and floats small end up. So you have this 4-foot diameter telephone pole in the sea, sticking up 40 feet into the air. No biggie, shows up on radar and easy to spot. Now, give that pole 20 years of floating around or so, it rots in such a way that it becomes sharpened to a perfect point by wind and waves, and looks quite menacing. Now, put it in a gale with 25-foot waves, 50 feet trout at peak, and it becomes a towering spike of death that shoots up from the sea every 15 to 20 minutes out of nowhere, 60 feet into the air, only to plunge down into the dark depths, waiting to skewer some unexpected boat in a few minutes when it thrusts out of the ocean again. It is a genuinely terrifying sight. Rare, but not so rare that I haven't seen two in one season. It's like the spiked D of Neptune, looking for an opportunity to F your day up in a particularly terrifying way. Story 4. You know the feeling of being in a full stadium? Tens of thousands of people all within sight of each other, all together? Multiply that by 100, and maybe that would be like the sea of sea mammals I was in the middle of, presumably on a bunch of food below, squid or something. There were half a dozen species of dolphin and half a dozen species of whale, all together, going completely crazy busting the surface. Hundreds of thousands, I'm guessing. Going into the forecastle of the small 42-foot lobster boat was like entering a different reality. Through the hole, you could hear. They were all talking to one another, and I could say you could hear them because it was something else entirely. The bones in my skull and the rest of my body were vibrating at every frequency heard, and sub and supersonic alike, in alien rhythms and repeating patterns. A once-in-a-lifetime sensation. Lasted about half an hour. Highly recommend. Story 5. I was night kayaking in the bay. It was around 3 to 4 a.m., and it was a beautiful pitch-black night, and I was watching the neon lights from the waterfront taverns and grills. Out of nowhere, I started hearing this sound like radio or walkie-talkie static. It was soft at first, then very loud, then soft again. I sat up to look for a boat that might be sneaking up on me, but there was nothing. I slowly laid back down again, and the sound started up. It was like the radio noise from the video game Silent Hill. Suddenly, there were two of them. One to the back of my kayak, another off to the starboard, right side. The sounds kept varying in intensity. Sometimes they were directed at me, but then they would shift, and I could feel the noise in other places. I started hearing the occasional click mixed in with the static. I was freaking out. I grabbed my paddle and was quietly looking around, trying to figure out what was making the noise, when a form raised up out of the water. It looks like a smooth rock or pillar. I could barely see it because of the darkness, but it almost looked like a giant's fingertip sticking up out of the water. Slowly, all around me, more of them surfaced. I was surrounded. The static intensified. All of these things were aiming their hissing, clicking static at me, and it almost hurt. I could even feel it on my skin at times. I stared at one closest to me, about to whack it with my paddle, when I just made out an eye. It was familiar. I'd seen that kind of eye before. At this point, I realized what the pillars were. They were dolphins. A whole pod of dolphins had snuck up on me and were checking me out. Their heads were poking straight up out of the water, and they were peeking over the edge of my kayak to see me. In my relief, I said out loud, "Oh, you're dolphins." And immediately they stopped hitting me with the static and started making whistles and clicks instead. We hung out for a while. A few even jumped around and played as I watched. They're a lot bigger than I've been led to believe. I thought dolphins were human-sized. These things were cow-sized. But they seemed friendly. After a while, I headed back to the harbor, and they followed me the whole way, even jumping ahead of me and guiding me in. I eventually discovered that the pod was well known and that they regularly harassed the local shrimping fleet, pulling open their nets and stealing the shrimp. I've even watched them do it on occasion. Those are some fat dolphins. Story 6. I was a new deck officer, still in training on board an exploration ship. The officer of the deck was visiting, augmenting officer, from a similar ship. So I had to stay on the bridge to help them handle some of the particular oddities of our ship, even though I was still getting seasick back then. It was the night watch, and I was horribly sick and curled up on the floor of the head bathroom in the back corner of the bridge. The officer of the deck must have thought I'd gone completely crazy, because they'd hear me vomit my guts out, flush the toilet, then start laughing with joy and wonder. The toilets flushed with seawater, and we were going through a patch of bioluminescence. Every time I threw up and flushed the toilet in the pitch-black little room, the bioluminescent organisms would flash, making an amazing fireworks show in the toilet bowl. Story 7. Not a sailor, but out at sea with my dad one night, and it went eerily calm. The wind died down, everything went silent, and the water went completely still. Not a ripple or other disturbance in sight. Just went completely glassy and reflected the sky perfectly. It would have felt like we were floating in space but for a few clouds drifting above. As if that weren't creepy enough, shortly after, a small ferry that we'd already seen approaching in the distance got closer and eventually passed us. Lights on in every window, not a soul in sight. Not one. We couldn't even hear the boat itself. It didn't make any noise at all, despite not being more than 500 feet from us, and with no other sound around. My dad and I talk about it all the time. We just can't explain what we saw. Story 8. I worked on a ferry that crossed a river. 3-minute trip, but a somewhat remote location. I worked alone from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. all year. In the winter, the darkness was profound. Some mornings, I'd show up in the complete darkness. You couldn't see lights from houses or street lights, and it was only as the sky got lighter did you realize you were so fogged in that the end of the boat was even hazy. Some mornings in the spring, when the spiders were going nuts building their webs, and there would be webs all over the cabin door, the gates, the boat that hadn't been there when I left the night before, from the cold morning dew or fog, there would be water droplets frozen all over them. When I would break a web to get past it, they would fall quickly to the ground and make a clinking sound from all the particles of ice. One time, I saw needle ice, where blades of ice grow straight out of the ground. I pulled onto the gravel parking pad in the morning and saw the needle ice in the dirt. I actually started the ferry late. It was fascinating to look at. I switched to a different boat, and my shift was 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. I remember having a very vivid dream one night about a deer with huge antlers standing on the end of the ferry in the dark, lit by the streetlight. 3 nights later, I actually saw that deer. It wasn't on the boat, it was up and back further, but it was like in a movie, completely silent, just me and the deer, the whole world dropping away. Last story. Many years ago, I used to go to a summer camp out in eastern Oregon. It was pretty well in the middle of nowhere, zero light pollution. The last year I attended, I went as a counselor, and the first camp of the summer was for a program called Touchstone. It was specifically meant for kids who had grown up in the city and never had a chance to really get out into anything remotely resembling wilderness. The first night of the Touchstone camp, we led them all away from the buildings using flashlights with red filters. For anyone who doesn't know, red light doesn't impact your night vision. And we're giving them a lecture on native mythology to keep their attention on us. Talked for about 20 minutes to make sure their eyes had gotten good and dark adjusted, and then told them all to look up. Hearing the absolute awe and wonder in their voices as they realized just how many stars you can truly see in a dark sky was so fulfilling. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope that made you found these stories as interesting as I did. I'm actually feeling kind of inspired, like I need to go outside now. We definitely got more amazing stories than creepy ones, so. Though I will be quite cautious if I get on a boat because those log spears sounded terrifying. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and if you subscribe, I will literally squee. Feel free to add me on Instagram, Steam, or PSN, Misreadit for all of those. And yeah, hopefully we can be gaming buddies. Have a great day. You deserve it.